Welcome to Grimm English Channel. Today we will listen to the story Hans in Luck by the brothers Grimm. This tale follows a young man named Hans who embarks on a journey home after years of hard work. Along the way, he trades everything he owns for what seems to be luckier treasures, but his adventure takes unexpected turns. Will Hans find true happiness? This will be an adapted version with familiar and simple English language so that we can easily listen and feel the story together. At the end of each chapter, we will learn and study some interesting vocabulary in the story. And right now, we will listen and learn English together through the story Hans in Luck. Chapter 1. The Beginning of Good Fortune. Once upon a time, there was a cheerful young man named Hans. Hans was known in his village as someone who always saw the bright side of life. He believed he was born under a lucky star, and he thought everything that happened to him was chapter of his good fortune. For 7 long years, Hans worked very hard for his master. He took care of the animals, tended the fields, and did everything his master asked him to do. Hans was a faithful and hard-working servant. One day, he decided it was time to return home and see his mother, whom he missed very much. Hans went to his master and said, "Master, I have worked for you for 7 years, but now it's time for me to go home and see my poor mother. Please pay me my wages so I can leave." His master, who appreciated Hans's loyalty, smiled and said, "Hans, you have been a good servant, and you deserve a fine reward." He handed Hans a large lump of silver, as big as Hans's head. Hans was thrilled. He wrapped the silver in his handkerchief, tied it up securely, and threw it over his shoulder. "Thank you, master," he said happily. He waved goodbye and started his journey home, whistling a merry tune. "I am so lucky," Hans thought. "With this silver, I can buy many things for my mother." As Hans walked along the dusty road, the heavy lump of silver started to weigh him down. He felt his back aching, and his feet began to drag. Hans thought to himself, "This silver is worth a lot, but it's also very heavy. I wish I had something easier to carry." Just then, Hans saw a man riding a horse. The horse trotted happily, its hooves clicking on the road. The rider looked relaxed, as if he were sitting in his armchair at home. Hans watched the man with envy. "What a fine thing it must be to ride on a horse," he thought. "You don't have to carry anything, and you can travel much faster." The man on the horse noticed Hans's admiring look and stopped. "Hello, friend," he called. "Why are you walking with such a heavy load?" Hans replied, "I am carrying a big lump of silver, but it's really tiring me out." The man smiled and said, "How about we make an exchange? I will give you my horse, and you can give me the silver. That way, you won't have to carry anything heavy anymore." Hans's eyes lit up. He thought it was a wonderful idea. "Yes, let's trade," Hans exclaimed. "But be careful, my friend, the silver is very heavy." The man laughed, got off the horse, and handed Hans the bridle and whip. He then took the silver and rode off, leaving Hans with the horse. Hans felt overjoyed. "This is the best trade I've ever made," he shouted. He climbed onto the horse's back, feeling like a king. He straightened his back, held the reins tightly, and cracked the whip. The horse began to walk, and Hans sang a cheerful song, "No care and no sorrow, a fig for the morrow, we'll laugh and be merry, sing neigh down dairy." For a while, everything seemed perfect. The horse trotted along smoothly, and Hans felt free as a bird. After a while, Hans thought, "Why not go a little faster?" He remembered the man's instructions. "Smack your lips and say jip." So, Hans smacked his lips and cried, "Jip." Suddenly, the horse started galloping very fast. Hans held on as tightly as he could, but the horse was too wild. It ran faster and faster until finally Hans lost his balance and fell off. Hans landed on the ground with a thud, his back covered in dust. He felt dizzy and sore. "Oh dear," he groaned, getting back on his feet. Riding a horse is not as easy as it looks. Just then a shepherd came by, driving a cow. The shepherd stopped and asked, "Are you all right?" Hans dusted himself off and sighed. "Yes, I am fine, but this horse is too wild for me. I think I would be happier with a cow like yours. A cow is slower and more gentle. Besides, I could have milk, butter, and cheese whenever I want." The shepherd, seeing Hans's wishful expression, said, Well, if you like my cow so much, I am willing to trade. You can have the cow and I'll take the horse. Hans couldn't believe his luck. Really? You would do that? He asked. Yes. The shepherd replied. I like to help others, even if I don't gain much from it. Hans's face beamed with happiness. What a kind man you are, he said. The two shook hands, and the shepherd took the horse while Hans led the cow. As Hans continued down the road, he felt more relaxed. He imagined having fresh milk whenever he wanted. This is the best trade yet, he thought. I can eat butter and cheese, and I will never go hungry. Feeling pleased with himself, Hans patted the cow's side and whistled a happy tune. He believed his luck was getting better and better. Little did he know that his adventures were far from over. Before continuing to the next chapter, let's learn some new vocabulary appeared in Chapter 1. The first word to learn is servant. Servant refers to a person who works for someone else, especially in a house. For example, Hans was a hard-working servant for 7 years. Next, we have wages. Wages refer to the money paid to someone for their work. For example, Hans asked his master to pay his wages so he could go home. Another word is handkerchief. Handkerchief is a small piece of cloth used to wipe the face or hands. For example, Hans wrapped the silver in his handkerchief. The fourth word is journey. Journey means an act of traveling from one place to another. For example, Hans began his journey home with the silver. Now let's look at trade. Trade means to exchange one thing for another. For example, Hans decided to trade the silver for a horse. Moving on to heavy. Heavy means difficult to carry because of weight. For example, the silver was heavy, making it hard for Hans to walk. The next word is whistle. Whistle means to make a high-pitched sound by forcing air through lips. For example, Hans whistled a merry tune while riding the horse. Now we have gallop. Gallop refers to a horse running fast. For example, the horse began to gallop when Hans shouted, "Jip!" Let's also discuss stumble. Stumble means to trip and almost fall while walking or running. For example, Hans stumbled as he tried to ride the wild horse. Finally, we have leisure. Leisure refers to free time to do what one wants. For example, Hans thought it was better to walk at his leisure behind the cow. Chapter 2. A series of lucky trades. Hans felt pleased as he led the cow along the road. What a wonderful trade, he thought. I now have a cow that will give me milk, butter, and cheese. I will never be hungry again. The cow walked slowly, making it easy for Hans to keep pace. He hummed a cheerful tune, imagining the happy look on his mother's face when she saw the cow. As noon approached, the sun grew hotter and Hans began to feel thirsty. His throat was dry and his tongue felt like sandpaper. I know what to do, Hans thought. I will milk my cow and have a nice, cool drink. He tied the cow to a tree stump, took off his leather cap and tried to milk the cow. But no milk came out. Hans tried again, this time pressing a little harder. Still, the cow remained dry. Hans was confused. What's wrong? He wondered aloud. This cow should give me plenty of milk. He kept trying, but the cow became annoyed. Suddenly, she kicked Hans hard in the head, knocking him to the ground. Hans lay there for a while, feeling dizzy and a bit silly. Just then, a butcher came by, pushing a wheelbarrow with a fat pig in it. The butcher saw Hans on the ground and quickly helped him up. Are you all right? The butcher asked. Yes, I think so, Hans replied, rubbing his head. I just tried to milk my cow, but she kicked me. The butcher looked at the cow and shook his head. That's an old cow, he said. She's probably too dry to give milk. She's only good for the slaughterhouse now. Hans felt disappointed. What a shame, he sighed. I thought I had made a lucky trade, but it seems I was wrong. The butcher, noticing Hans's sad expression, offered an idea. I have a fat pig here, he said. If you like, I will trade it for your cow. A pig is much easier to handle and you can make sausages and bacon from it. Hans's eyes lit up. That sounds like a great idea, he exclaimed. I have never had a pig before, and it would make a wonderful meal. The two men quickly made the trade. The butcher took the cow and Hans took the pig, holding it by the string tied to its leg. Hans felt happy again. This pig is much better than a cow, he thought. I don't have to worry about milking it, and I will have plenty to eat for a long time. Hans continued down the road, feeling lucky once more. He imagined all the delicious meals he would have. Sausages, bacon, and even a roast. This is truly the best trade so far, he said to himself. As Hans walked along, he met a countryman carrying a large white goose. The man stopped and asked, "What time is it, friend?" Hans pulled up the sleeve of his worn jacket and said, "I'm not sure, but it must be afternoon." The countryman, eager to chat, began to tell Hans about his goose. "This goose is only 8 weeks old," he said proudly. "It's fat and heavy, and it will make a delicious roast for a special occasion." Hans looked at the goose and was impressed by its size. "It's a fine bird," he said. "But you should feel this pig. It's no trifle." The countryman suddenly looked serious. He leaned closer to Hans and whispered, "My friend, I must warn you. In the village I just came from, a pig was stolen from the squire's pen. I hope your pig isn't the one that was stolen. If the squire catches you with it, you might be in big trouble." Hans's face turned pale. "Oh dear," he cried. "I didn't know that. I certainly don't want to get into any trouble." The countryman nodded sympathetically. "You'd better let me take the pig, just to be safe. I'll give you my goose in exchange, and that way you won't have to worry." Hans felt relieved. "Thank you, kind man," he said. "I don't want any trouble with the squire." The two men quickly swapped the pig for the goose. Hans now carried the goose under his arm, feeling light and free. "This is the best trade yet," he thought. "I have a fine goose, and I am safe from any trouble." As Hans continued on his way, he thought about the many things he could do with the goose. "I will have a wonderful roast," he said to himself, "and the fat will last me for months. I can use the feathers to make a soft pillow too. Mother will be so happy when she sees what I bring home." Hans imagined his mother's delighted smile as she cuddled the soft pillow made from the goose feathers. "This is truly my lucky day," he said aloud. He felt proud of his clever trading and thought that nothing could go wrong. With the goose under his arm, Hans walked happily along the road, humming a cheerful tune. He was sure that he had made the smartest trade yet. The goose felt light compared to the heavy silver, wild horse, stubborn cow, and noisy pig. He was certain that he had finally found the perfect deal. But Hans's adventures were not over. As he neared the next village, he noticed a man sitting by the roadside, grinding scissors and knives. The man was singing a happy song. "O'er hill and o'er dale, so happy I roam, work light and live well, all the world is my home." Hans watched the scissor grinder with interest, wondering what new opportunity might be waiting for him. Now let's take a break and learn some new words that appeared in Chapter 2. The first word to learn is thirsty. Thirsty means needing or wanting to drink. For example, Hans felt thirsty under the hot sun and wanted to drink milk. Next, we have milk. Milk means to extract milk from a cow, goat, or other animal. For example, Hans tried to milk the cow, but she was dry. Another word is kick. Kick means to hit something with the foot. For example, the cow kicked Hans when he tried to milk her. The fourth word is wheelbarrow. Wheelbarrow is a small cart with one wheel used for carrying things. For example, the butcher was pushing a pig in a wheelbarrow. Now let's look at exchange. Exchange means to give something and receive something else in return. For example, Hans exchanged the cow for the pig. Moving on to delicious. Delicious means very tasty. For example, Hans thought the pig would make a delicious meal. The next word is steal. Steal means to take something that does not belong to you. For example, the countryman warned Hans that the pig might be stolen. Now we have pale. Pale means light in color, often because of fear or illness. For example, Hans's face turned pale when he heard about the stolen pig. Finally, we have warn. Warn means to tell someone about danger or trouble. For example, the countryman warned Hans about the pig's possible trouble. Chapter 3. The final lesson. Hans walked cheerfully along the road with the goose under his arm. He felt pleased with his trades and believed he was the luckiest man in the world. "This goose is a true treasure," he thought. "It will give me a delicious meal, its fat will last for months, and its feathers will make a soft pillow for my mother." As Hans approached the next village, he noticed a man sitting by the roadside. The man was a scissor grinder, busy sharpening scissors and knives on a grindstone. He was singing a lively tune, "O'er hill and o'er dale, so happy I roam, work light and live well, all the world is my home." The song was so cheerful that Hans couldn't help but smile. He stopped to watch the man for a while and then said, "You must be a happy man, sir. You seem to enjoy your work very much." The scissor grinder looked up and grinned. "Yes, I am very happy," he said. "Mine is a golden trade. Whenever I put my hand into my pocket, I find money there." Hans's eyes widened with interest. "Really? That sounds amazing," he exclaimed. The scissor grinder noticed Hans's curiosity and asked, "Where did you get that beautiful goose?" Hans proudly explained, "I traded a pig for it, after trading a cow, a horse, and a lump of silver before that." The scissor grinder was impressed. "You have made some clever trades, my friend," he said. "But if you want to be truly happy and always have money in your pocket, you should become a scissor grinder like me. All you need is a good grindstone." Hans thought about it for a moment. He imagined finding money in his pocket every time he reached for it. "What a wonderful idea," he thought. "If I had a grindstone, I would never be poor." The scissor grinder saw Hans's excitement and said, "I have an extra grindstone here. It's not new, but it still works well. I will trade it for your goose if you like." Hans's heart leaped with joy. "Yes, yes, let's trade," he said eagerly. He handed the goose to the scissor grinder, who gave him a rough grindstone in return. Hans lifted the grindstone and felt its weight. It was much heavier than the goose, but he was not discouraged. "This is the best trade yet," he thought. "Now I can make my own money by sharpening knives and scissors." Feeling excited, Hans started down the road with the grindstone on his back. As he walked, the grindstone became heavier and heavier. His back ached and his shoulders hurt, but Hans tried to stay positive. "It's a small price to pay for such a valuable tool," he said to himself. After walking for a while, Hans began to feel very tired and hungry. He had no food left, and the grindstone was making him sweat under the hot sun. "I need to rest," he thought. He spotted a clear river nearby and decided to take a break. He put the grindstone down carefully on the riverbank and leaned over to drink some water. As Hans stooped down to drink, he accidentally bumped the grindstone with his elbow. The heavy stone rolled a little, then tumbled down into the water with a splash. Hans watched it sink slowly into the clear, deep river. At first, he was shocked. "Oh no," he cried, "my grindstone is gone." But then, as he stood there, he suddenly felt a great sense of relief. The burden on his back was gone, and he felt lighter than ever. "Why should I be sad?" Hans said aloud. "Losing the grindstone means I am free from its weight. Now I can walk easily and happily without any trouble." Hans danced with joy on the riverbank. He laughed and clapped his hands, feeling happier than he had in a long time. "I am truly the luckiest man alive," he declared. "I have nothing to carry, no heavy burdens, and no worries." Hans realized that he did not need riches or possessions to be happy. The feeling of freedom was worth more than anything he had ever owned. "I am lucky not because of what I have, but because I am free from it all," he thought. With a light heart, Hans continued on his journey home. He walked briskly, whistling a merry tune and feeling as if he were walking on air. The road seemed easier now, and he felt stronger with each step. "I have learned the secret to happiness," Hans said to himself. "It is not about having more, but about needing less." After some time, Hans reached his mother's house. She was surprised to see him arrive empty-handed, but Hans's face was so bright and cheerful that she couldn't help but smile. "Mother," he said, "I have had many adventures, made many trades, and learned an important lesson. True happiness comes from within." Hans told his mother all about his journey, from the silver to the grindstone, and how he had lost each thing along the way. But he spoke of each loss with a laugh, showing that he did not regret any chapter of his adventure. His mother hugged him warmly and said, "My dear Hans, you may have come back with empty hands, but you have returned with a full heart. That is worth more than all the riches in the world." Hans felt grateful and happy as he sat down with his mother for a simple meal. "I am finally home," he thought, "and I have everything I need." From that day on, Hans lived simply and happily with his mother. He no longer sought riches, for he knew that the greatest treasure was the joy of being free. And so Hans truly became Hans in luck, not because of what he had, but because of the happiness he found within himself. It's the end of the story. We will once again learn together some other new vocabulary in the story. The first word to learn is sharpen. Sharpen means to make something, like a knife, sharper. For example, the scissor grinder was sharpening scissors by the roadside. Next, we have pocket. Pocket refers to a small bag sewn into clothes for carrying small items. For example, the scissor grinder said he always found money in his pocket. Another word is valuable. Valuable means worth a lot of money or useful. For example, Hans thought the grindstone was a valuable tool. The fourth word is burden. Burden refers to something heavy that causes difficulty or trouble. For example, the grindstone became a heavy burden for Hans to carry. Now, let's look at accidentally. Accidentally means by chance, not on purpose. For example, Hans accidentally bumped the grindstone into the river. Moving on to float. Float means to rest or move on the surface of water. For example, the grindstone did not float, it sank in the river. The next word is freedom. Freedom refers to the state of being free and not controlled. For example, Hans felt freedom when the grindstone sank in the river. Now we have realize. Realize means to understand something suddenly. For example, Hans realized that having less made him happier. Let's also discuss relief. Relief is a feeling of happiness when something bad ends. For example, Hans felt great relief after losing the grindstone. Finally, we have hug. Hug means to hold someone close to show affection. For example, Hans's mother hugged him when he returned home.